Welcome to Talent Strategy 60. I am your friendly neighborhood talent strategy nerd, Dr. Jim, and we are here again with our season 2 premiere. And the focus of our show is to empower HR leaders to do more with less by leveraging community intelligence. And that's the mission of the show. And today's topic is actually a multifaceted topic. We're going to have an author spotlight, so we're graced with 2 great authors on the show, and we're going to tackle the topic of building a culture of empowerment. So we know what the ground rules are. Let's get our panel introduced and get everybody familiar with our guests. So first up, I want to introduce Ashley Brundage to the show. Ashley, welcome aboard. And why don't you tell the audience that is joining us on YouTube, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing.
Oh my goodness. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm Ashley T. Brundage. I'm the empowerment and leadership expert and author of Empowering Differences. I uncovered this 4-step empowerment process that I'll talk a little bit about today. When I overcame harassment, discrimination, and homelessness as a proud out woman of transgender experience in the financial services industry. I got a job as a part-time associate, and then using this leadership research that I did on empowerment, I was able to grow in my career to be the National Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at PNC Bank in 4.5 years. And then I did DEI work for 6 years until I decided to go out on my own last year, starting my own company and helping people share my empowerment research.
Great stuff, Ashley, and thank you for sharing that with all of us today. I do have a follow-up. I'm sure you're shocked. I think one of the things that's really interesting about your story, and I'd like you to get the audience up to speed, is kind of your process that you took to be to transition into banking, because you originally went the career arc in retail, and then you made the transition to banking, which is not necessarily the most diverse of sectors or industries. Tell us a little bit about, how you navigated that transition and that process of career switch, as well as all the other stuff that was happening in your life at the time.
Well, I think it always starts with you. You have to be a big proponent of your own level of how you feel empowered. So I usually recommend that people ask your own self open-ended questions and then memorialize them. And so that's kind of step 1 of the empowerment process, is to know yourself. And then you get to learn about other people. And then you'll see where your pain points are. And if that means what you did was help people, well, that translates across all industries. And if what you did was sell things, then that translates across all industries. So that's why it's so important to kind of have a framework of how you're going to learn about people who are different, because that will be your key as a leader growing forward.
Great stuff, and thank you for sharing that. Next up, I want to introduce Kim Clark. And not to be outdone, Kim has probably one of the best books out on the market in terms of title. And I definitely want to make sure we're broadcasting and amplifying Kim's work as well as her book. So Kim, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. It's so nice to meet both of you and work with both of you. So thanks for having me here. So what Dr. Jim is alluding to is that this book, The Conscious Communicator, the fine art of not saying stupid stuff. We're a family-friendly program here. And so I co-authored this with TED speaker and executive communications and head of DEI, Janet Stovall, and I'm very proud of the work. We have not 4, but 5 steps in the book. It's a framework of how to help organizations stop saying stupid stuff. And so, and part of it is really empowering employees. But my background and what I do is I basically help that's going to be interesting to see how the audience responds to that. It's a great question. It was an Amazon bestseller, so I thank everybody who has picked it up. I really appreciate it. We just released it at the end of September of last year. So I help communicators and content creators understand their role and responsibility in diversity, equity, and inclusion in society, within their organizations. We need to build skills. we don't know what to do and what our role is. We may not understand the influence and the power that we actually have as communicators, whether it's formally a part of our title or not. External or internal, doesn't matter. All of us need to really learn the skills and understand what our responsibility is on this, because, as we'll probably get to today, culture happens with or without us. And so we need to intentionally shape it. And empowerment is a key ingredient in that, especially in engaging leaders and employees in the efforts of DEI. And so there's so much I want to talk about with this as it relates to empowerment. So I really appreciate being here and a part of the conversation.
Awesome. I'm thrilled to have you on here. And one of my other favorite people in the world of LinkedIn just chimed in and gave you a 5 out of 5. Kurt,
Kurt, thank you.
has an awesome story. So one of these days I'm going to have him on the show too. But I have a follow up for you, Kim, if you'll indulge me. So one of the things that I'm always curious about is the journey that you took to become a writer. What was it about this particular topic? The fine art of not saying stupid stuff, that prompted you to start the writing process and actually pick that as a topic.
For those who are familiar with Iyanla Vanzant, she repeats a story that she was told that you're either a speaker who writes or a writer who speaks. So Ashley, I'd be interested to know what your response to this is, but I'm a speaker who writes. So I come from a teaching background. I've been a lecturer at San Jose State University for over 20 years. I love teaching. And so that's my favorite part of the work, is getting in and getting my hands dirty, working with people, building skills, applying them, all of that. I always knew I'd write a book for at least the last 15 years, but it was always that, question of about what would I have to talk about, right? Now, I had a horrible coming out experience when I was 28 years old, coming out of a conservative Christian environment, considered suicide, the whole thing. But I made a documentary about that back in 2006. It was based on my story. It wasn't my story, but it was based on my story. And so I'm like, okay, so I know I can, come from a personal place and help teach people skills and how to facilitate urgent but sensitive conversations. Then it wasn't until the summer of 2020 when I started seeing all of these black squares go out by organizations posting their solidarity statements with the Black community, that I went, no, wait, what are you doing? What are you doing? Because being in-house at GoDaddy, PayPal, GitHub, NetApp, I worked at a number of large brands running global teams for internal and employee communications and culture communications. And I've been speaking in the circuit of communication conferences for years. So I had been teaching people how to do this DEI communications thing. When I started seeing those posts, you don't know what you're saying. You don't know what the work is to really follow through with what you're saying. Now, I was really, really afraid that these statements would be performative. So I started hustling in 2020 saying, I'd get on every webinar, who will let me talk? So I was trying to reach communicators and say, you don't know what you don't know. That was well-intentioned. You did mean it. But now we have to understand what the work is to live up to those statements. And we have seen, and there's been research that my co-author has shared that talks about how very few companies have actually come anywhere close to the commitments that they've made in 2022. And here we are at the beginning of 2023. So when that started happening, I'm like, now I know what I want to talk about in a book. So I reached out to Janet Stovall and I said, would you co-author this book with me? Because I have the inside, I have the internal communication side and experience. She has the external side. So between the two of us, we were trying to cover the whole kind of corporate communication, social media, PR, crisis communications gamut.
That's I really appreciate you sharing all of that context and also bringing in your personal story into it as well. And I think when we're looking at empowerment as a broader topic that we're going to tackle today, both you and Ashley lead in ways that make yourself vulnerable. And I would argue, I'm not the expert in this topic, I would argue that is a central element of creating an empowerment culture, is to make it acceptable for people to be vulnerable. So I appreciate what you shared. But one of the things, Kim, that you mentioned that really caught my attention, and it ties back to some of the conversations that Lawrence, my co-host, who's manning the chat, and I have had throughout our podcasting experience. When we talk with people like Maya Winston of O9 Solutions, when we talk with Whitney Goins, who is one of the leaders in DEI at Molson Coors, when we talk to Jaquanda Harris, Jaquanda Nelson. Sorry, I always screw up her name, so apologies. But one of the things, and they're all African-American women, one of the things that they always they talk about a couple of things that always stuck with me. One, you can't make the DEI effort, in whatever shape it takes, appear performative, and you hit on that in your comment. And the other part of it is that if you're trying to engage in these conversations or these initiatives, you can't make it about you. It's got to be about whoever is being aggrieved by the situation. And I think that was one of the frustrations that I heard from a lot of my peers. And I'm not a DEI practitioner in the sense that you are, but that was what I heard from a lot of the guests that I've had that are in this space, that, hey, we appreciate the conversation, but it isn't about you. It's about who is being impacted. And I think that's a really important distinction to draw out, and I appreciate you sharing that. So let's set the stage a little bit. The topic is on building a culture of empowerment, and I'm going to frame it this way. So we know what bad looks like in terms of organizational culture. There's poor selection processes, there's poor talent attraction processes, there's probably gaps in onboarding, there's gaps in development and identifying high performers, there's gaps when it comes to selecting the best employees or even qualified employees across the board in a neutral way to progress through the organization. There's high turnover. There's all of these different things. We have a clear idea of what bad looks like. And oftentimes when we're looking for solutions to all of these problems that exist within the talent strategy continuum, we start throwing out, sort of buzzwordy terms. Well, the secret to overcoming this particular environment is to create an empowered workforce. And that sounds great. And people will often, Kim, to your point, start, using these language as a way to demonstrate that your workforce isn't what bad looks like. It's actually a better version of it. My issue with that is that a lot of these words aren't really well defined, and there isn't a process that's built in to actually help you overcome those challenges or shift the tide and get you in a position to be the type of organization that represents what good looks like. So when we look at building an empowerment culture, we know what bad looks like. How do we start the process of defining what good looks like? And I think I'll open, I'll bring Ashley into that, into the conversation. I'd like your input on, hey, am I wrong in thinking that some of the fundamentals in fixing the problems haven't even been established? And if that is true, how would you recommend that work be started?
Wow, this is deep. So, I mean, honestly, to tell you the starting point, if you're having a conversation about a starting point around what is an empowerment culture, then you're doing the right thing, hopefully. To me, I just think that you should be having a conversation with it as people. The first mistake that organizations make is when they immediately think that they can actually drive empowerment. But the actual definition of empowerment is authority and power connected to people. Nowhere in there does it say organization. Now, people in an organization can drive empowerment for other people. People can drive empowerment for themselves, aka self-empowerment. But a lot of times we get lost in this framework of even just missing the first boat of what is empowerment. And by putting it in these three categories of authority and power and then people, you now have the ability to kind of say, okay, well, wait a minute, what do those mean? And you should probably know what people are, right? Especially with everything that we do, and the people who are watching this are a very people-centric focus, right? Whether that be communications, whether that be human resources, or the combination of both. But the two other parts is where people get kind of lost in this confusion, and the dust settles, and then they're thinking to themselves, oh, well, that's empowerment. This is empowerment. But from my research, what I found is that the authority-driven pieces of empowerment is really the human part of human resources. It's the emotional quotient of feeling empowered. It's when you got that boss-like mentality that says that you're going to overcome homelessness, harassment, discrimination, you name it, whatever it is that you've navigated in your life. You did that because you dug down deep and you found everything that you needed to fight forward. It's usually also the 5-star rating that you got from your Uber driver, right? And you had to leave some sort of review about how people are. That's always tracking authority. And then you have the power side, which is a little bit different, because this is where we always get into this acquired items of resources. And this is the resource side of human resources when you look at empowerment. And so all the resource items, or AKA I call the power items, are easy tracked metric unit of measure items. Like right now in the building I'm in, the power is on, thank goodness. So now you know that it's being tracked by kilowatts per hour. And then when you think about this even further and you think, okay, well, what about what I'm paying my employees and all those derivatives of anything financially? Yes, those are power items. But the most powerful of all the power items in empowerment is, of course, the time, and how you track and measure time also very easily. So when you start thinking about it in this lane, and now you say, okay, well, what's the first thing you want to do to build an empowerment culture is better understand and leverage empowerment. You have to be able to identify it when it's happening in every moment, but not just you. You have to communicate back to your people, the people who are all a part of this, because each person is going to have their own expectation of what they're bringing to the organization. They're going to be hopefully keeping track of their own measures of empowerment and how they're building that connection. And then that is going to be the thing that ultimately transforms your organization.
Holy cow, we could have an entire conversation on just what you said right there. And I'm going to throw this in your lap, Kim, and have you deconstruct some things. So there's a few things that stood out. I mean, obviously I set the stage up earlier in terms of stating what the landscape looks like, but Ashley actually brought out a lot of interesting things that I'd like your take on, or you can flip it back to what you've seen. One of the interesting things about what Ashley said is that, ultimately this is a human and people focused function and HR should own it. And what caught my attention about that is in certain aspects, when you look at HR's role in terms of navigating an organization, it's often protect the financial interests of the organization. So HR typically doesn't step into these sort of what I'll call third rail in air quotes topics, because they want to protect the organization. I think that's misguided, but it is what it is. So I'm curious to get your take on HR's role in setting an empowerment culture. And then the other part of it is Ashley also mentioned time. And the reason why I draw that out is, Kim, when you were talking, one of the criticisms that you had was a lot of the DEI efforts tend to be performative by a lot. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not putting words in your mouth. Tend to be performative because organizations will gravitate towards whatever is quote unquote in vogue in the moment. And as soon as the economic wins or the environmental wins change, those things are forgotten. So there's a lot of elements here that I'd be curious to get your take on. How do we take these different components that are in conflict and really level set a way where we can move into a true empowerment environment?
If we had a true empowerment culture, these things would not be in contradiction. They would not be in conflict. We would be aligned to our company's mission, vision, values, and let that be our North Star, our guiding principles. The question on HR has to catch up. So when they first protect the company and hurt the employees. That is the antithesis of actually, they're in cross purposes of what the intention here is. If they actually are supportive and flip that and first prioritize the employees, you are therefore protecting the company. That's where empowerment comes from. Now, communications, I'm a big believer that language leads to behavior. So our role in communications is to set that tone. Can I give you some examples of what comms can do around empowerment? So one of them is around cultural moments. We have Black History Month coming up. We have Women's History Month, International Women's Day. We have Pride Month, Native American Heritage Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, Disabilities Awareness, et cetera. So there's these opportunities throughout the year that are often that's not a word. Performatized is not a word, but that's what I'm going to use. So what we do as communicators is that for some reason we get a budget around those communicating those cultural moments. And, maybe, it comes from HR or it comes from marketing and stuff. And so we go out and buy a bunch of wristbands. And we, tell historical figures, stories on our screens within the offices. And we're not empowering our employee resource groups, our business resource groups, our DEI committees, our councils to lead the content. They are the ones that need to be telling us what needs to be said. We own the channels. We know how to tell a story, so we can provide that service. However, empowering and democratizing how people talk about their traditions, their customs, their own stories, their own part of heritage, experiences, whether it's through Slack or other intranet channels or whatever it may be. But that is one key way that communications needs to, role model an empowered culture, which is allow folks to talk about their faith traditions, the high holidays. How do you experience it? What was Kwanzaa like for you? So it's not kept tight within corporate communications, and that we have to, one of the biggest questions I often get is that we can't say something about everything. And I'm like, why not? Why do you have to be the one to decide what holidays, what cultural moments? Like there's National Coming Out Day, there's Transgender Visibility Day, there's all these days. Why not empower, and set up your channels to empower your culture to tell their stories, in alignment with your code of conduct, of course. But it's like you empower the culture to tell their own stories. And another thing that I get, oftentimes is, leaders will say, we're all staring at leadership to say, you do something about DEI. They're the least equipped to lead DEI. However, what are their strengths? Their strengths, let's empower them with their strengths. Their strengths are, resourcing, budgeting, and we know budgets are moral documents, right? And then we also have, decision-making authority. So leverage their power to talk about, Ashley was talking about power. And you share it with the people who do have the answers, do have the experience, do know what to do, but they don't have the decision-making authority. They don't have the budget. They don't have the resourcing capacity that leaders do. This is where that empowerment comes in. You know what to do. I can finance it. And that's an empowered culture coming together in order to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And communicators can help write the story of what DEI is to make sure everybody sees themselves in DEI work. So there's a whole body of work that I do based on something my mentor taught me called majority coding. So like, what is that? What is the impact of that? I had a client come to me and say, we're getting in our employee engagement surveys, we're getting feedback that we are writing for a white audience. What does that mean? We don't know what that means or what it looks like. And so I said, well, I'm sure there's a lot of isms, that are embedded in communications because there's bias. So that's the kind of work that I try to do, is to say, I'm going to empower our communicators to really grasp the role and skill set that they need to have to identify bias, what leads to decisions making, what leads to the communications we're putting out there, trying to force fit HR and leadership in a way that they're not accustomed to. How do we help move them along from a communication standpoint, from a committee standpoint, employee resource group standpoint, to really see that sharing power, which is empowerment to Ashley's point, it's sharing this power that is absolutely necessary to get the talent that we need, to retain the talent that we need, to grow the talent that we need. This is simply a required skill moving forward.
Wow. Okay. So Kim, congratulations. You just blew up the chat on the stream. So there's going to be a lot of stuff that's coming back that I think creates for a really interesting discussion. So Lawrence Brown, LB, resident big voice guy who is monitoring the chat. So he's my co-host on Cascading Leadership. He posed a really interesting question that I'd like the both of you to tackle if you're up for it. And the question is created some interesting discussion in the chat between Josh Mueller and Kurt Reinhardt as well. And that question is, do DEI efforts belong in HR in the first place? And I think there's some interesting context into that, because normally most organizations have HR reporting into finance. And if that happens, most of the time, finance is just going to look at, okay, well, how much is this going to cost and what's the ROI on it? And I don't necessarily know if that's really how these things should be evaluated. So there's one question on DEI belonging in HR. And then obviously LB followed up with, well, why do so many companies miss the mark when you have this dynamic going on as far as creating an empowerment culture? So there's a lot there to unpack. So I don't know who wants to take it first. Ashley raised her hand. So Ashley, take it away. Where does all of these conversations belong, or where do all of these conversations belong?
So that they belong at the in the whole organization, starting with the CEO office and their budget. But I can tell you personally, having led the transformation of PNC Bank's diversity and inclusion team away from HR into its own business unit, I'll tell you that I was a huge advocate for that to happen a long time ago. But it took the murder of George Floyd for that then to happen, and then people to realize that we weren't just an HR function. Wow, okay, we were actually connecting all of the work that we were doing in the community. We were generating revenue. I handed in a scorecard that was millions of dollars of revenue created every year from programs that I was overseeing around diversity. And then we were creating products and other goods and services surrounding diversity that was not HR seen. We had launched debit cards with rainbow on them. We created a social justice advocacy network of minority business advocates. All of these things were things that were going across all the business units. So if you think that DEI is just an HR function, then you're going to be missing the boat eventually, because you're going to be missing that connection to your customers, and then all the people who you want to be your future customers, which is literally everybody, hopefully. And you need to be smart about that. So that's my thing, is just being smart about how you do that, though, because you can't just snap your fingers and immediately have DEI or be its own business unit. You have to make sure that you're strategic about that. So one of the other things that we did was we paired it with other like-minded parts of the organization. So we had the foundation that came with D&I, which included all the money that we were doing for low and moderate level income communities, which largely affects lots of diverse communities and diverse population minority groups. And then we also combined everything we were doing in the foundation, the communication space, and community banking. So all of those three pieces kind of went together. to create one business unit that was called the Corporate Responsibility Group. And everything that you do around, responsible business, right, should then be part of that, I think. But that's just me.
Oh no, I'm totally with you. Actually, I go so far as I heard one speaker say that the head of DEI in an organization should not be reporting to any other kind of C-suite member, including the CEO. How they don't know? They're not DEI practitioners. They don't know what is performance? What do we, So having an external person, actually an external consultant, be that kind of accountability partner as somebody that the head of DEI can report to or get goals from or, stay accountable to is actually an external person, because typically the heads of DEI and DEI practitioners in-house are the only ones that know what they know. And so to be laddered into the head of HR, who has been set up to protect the company, to Dr. Jim's, point earlier, we're set up to fail if you put DEI in HRs, especially because of tradition, because of how the systems have set up. The strength of HR is that it has power over policies, processes, the systems, the talent management systems, right? So that has to be its own bucket. But DEI, to Ashley's point, completely agree. It has to be woven into the fabric. Sales has to see themselves in it. Marketing has to see them. Comms has to see. Customer service has to see. Product has to see themselves in it. And that is actually the part of the fault is communicators writing a narrative, writing a story that is so vague. Most annual reports, when you're reading what companies are saying, I could flip through the HRC Equality magazine. I'm going to do a post of this, and I can look at Ashley knows what I'm talking about. Look at all the ads, and it's just the same language over and over and over and over again. And to your earlier point, Dr. Jim, centers on the company. So that all has to be flipped. That all has to be reimagined. So I completely agree that the only way you're going to be successful in DEI, in having it become the rhythm of the business, is to have it as its own thing. Now, I am a big supporter. There's a whole chapter about it in the book, talking about DEI communications as two things: a specific expert within your organization, and that person has team members within all of the different departments, DEI communications as it relates to, and you specifically want somebody that's working for people managers, DEI communications with people managers. That'll really mitigate a lot of saying stupid stuff right there. But also then there's the general skill set. So even if you have a DEI team, you are not off the hook. They are trying to teach you how to fish. You have your own independent role. That's why I want to be, working with communicators, because and helping them rewrite the narrative around DEI so people can see themselves and they feel empowered in the work. So us as communicators, showing these ways, inviting and creating these ways that employees and leaders can see themselves in the work, want to engage in it, because that's a big problem I see with my clients, is that people are just over it. I'm like, this isn't a trend. To Patricia's point, they don't know what the mark is. What is our point? What problem or problems are we solving for? And how do we empower the culture to be a part of the solution? It can't be kept upstairs. It can't be kept in corporate communications. It can't be kept in HR. It is meant to be shared because it affects everybody. So everybody should have a role in participating in the DEI efforts. And everyone does have a role, but they need to see themselves in it. They need to be trained and supported and held accountable. And they need to have grace when they mess up. We need to foster that learning environment, to support people through their paths and just be there for them through this work. Because again, there's no turning back, my friends. There's only forward. So we have to build these skills And we have to share that power and role model it from a communication standpoint. And one of the first things us communicators need to do around the narrative when we're working on the annual report or whatever it may be in that town hall, we've got to let go of the jargon. We have to let go of being so vague about DEI commitments and the language of the journey. Sure, it's a journey, but let's not use that term journey, for example, as an excuse that it's just going to take a really long time. A go-to-market strategy can take 5 years or 5 months. It's a decision. So what is your advanced decision around DEI? And communicators create visibility, so that also creates accountability. That's another superpower of communicators. Visibility creates accountability. So we need to clean up our language as communicators to be more specific and be more action-oriented. But it's not all up to us and those who hold decision-making power and budget resourcing power. You have to empower the culture for them to see themselves in the solution and be a part of the work. That's really what it comes down to.
So, okay. So for those that are watching on the streams, either on YouTube or on LinkedIn, can you drop some clapping hands emojis there? Because Kim and Ashley have been dropping like TED Talks for the last half hour. So it's pretty awesome to hear that. And I do have some follow-ups that I want to bring out. There's a lot of key things that have been said so far that I'm going to call out, because I think when we're looking at what are the action items that HR leaders and people leaders need to take back, we've already, in Kim, what you just talked about, you talked about, well, hey, there should be an internal and external expert that handles DEI issues that shouldn't report into HR. And it really probably shouldn't report into the C-suite as well. And I think that's important from my perspective. Ashley, I'm gonna come to you in just a second. I think there's something important in that, because when you look at who occupies most of the C-suite in most companies out there, it's just a bunch of dudes. So if you're asking the C-suite for advice on how to handle diversity, you can't ask the folks, and I'm probably gonna, this is where I probably should have read your book, Kim, and not say stupid stuff. You can't ask a bunch of people who are in power how to, be more effective in uplifting those that are out of power, because there's an issue of bias and interest that comes in where people aren't going to, under normal circumstances, voluntarily give away their power. This was something that came up in a conversation that John Graham and I were having previously. So I think that's an important distinction that you drew out there. Ashley, I want you were chomping at the bit, so I want to make sure that you have your say.
Yeah, well, just really quick on this exact topic of who is the one that kind of holds you accountable. and Kim was, hinting at it being someone internal and someone external, but just like you don't audit your own financials as an organization. If you're the auditor of your financials, how is that an independent audit that was done? So you need to think about it in that same construct. Just like you've consulted with the firm to audit your financials, and your audit, maybe your chief audit officer sits on an island on their own and they report to the board. That's how big corporations do it, right? Especially ones that are tracked in by or held accountable by the government or other entities. So you should be looking at DEI like that and have that external person, and then really need to make sure that it's a firm that you trust and that you have the same shared values system, and that they understand what you're looking for as an organization, and then there's a mix between your core values and their core values too. So I think core values also matter in this kind of conversation of where this lives, is know what your core, but don't just say DEI is a core value and then not actually have that embedded into the reason of how you hold that core value accountable, is another piece to this as well.
So Yeah, I appreciate you chiming in. There's a really interesting and great response that Rusty just threw in the chat, and he makes the point that the folks in power must be the ones asking how they can share and leverage their power, and I don't disagree with that point. My question to you, the experts, and I'll have Kim field this, and then have Ashley get her take in it too, is how do you create the space for those in power to give their power away? Because I think that's one of the obstacles that exists in moving the ball forward in these conversations. How do you take it to that level where people are actually being selfless in advancing these causes? Because I think that's a tough ask. Maybe I'm wrong. Kim, what's your take on it?
Oh no, 100%. Absolutely. Tough ask for sure. I mean, there's a lot of, I'll tap into my Christian background. There's a lot of come to Jesus that needs to happen in general through all the isms, and this kind of sense of learning, but there's so much fear around it. And fear sometimes is really just lack of knowledge. And it's fear of the unknown and fear of being successful and capable. And what does this mean for me? But what is our rock bottom here, friends? Like, when are we going to hit that rock bottom to see that this isn't working? The way that things are so controlled, the current, systems and the way that they're set up, what are we reinforcing as a culture in allowing toxicity? So I heard this great story on another webinar where somebody was saying, nobody is hiring toxicity consultants to come in and teach the culture how to be toxic and teach managers how to be toxic. And yet it's what prevails in many of our, not all, but many of our organizations. And that's because we've just kind of allowed it to run amok. So, you do have to have external people come in and help guide the way, but the people on the inside of the house need to lead the way. So to help people who are used to having power, oh my God, there's so many people I wish I could tap into and channel right now to answer this question. And, one of the things I think of is Heather McGhee's book, Zero Sum, where she talks about the zero sum game and the kind of the myth about that. And the analogy I like to use is a bonfire. So if you keep a fire on the beach, I think Ashley's in like 7-degree weather we're at now. So a fire sounds probably pretty nice. If you keep it small and only
Ashley's
few people.
in 87-degree weather. So
okay.
I was extremely jealous being across the Cheddar Curtain in Milwaukee on that, but that's your weather report for the day. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So only a few people, can intentionally keep that bonfire small, and only they get warm and only their buddies get warm. Right. But that is not a sustainable plan from an environmental standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a societal standpoint. What is our rock bottom? How small does it need to get? How tight does it need to get before it goes out? So here's another option. Put some more wood on the fire. Expand it. What's going to happen? It's going to get bigger. It's going to warm. You're going to have to move back from it. That makes space. That creates opportunity. That demonstrates where inequities are in our systems and processes and policies, and allows more people to come in, and they're empowered to be a part of the conversation, to make decisions that impact themselves. So it just gets bigger and bigger. So that's a real opportunity that we have. And I say that, when I'm looking down in the future and I'm looking at my crystal ball, this is the remit. DEI is not a nice to have. It's not fluffy. It's not soft skills. It's not warm and fuzzy. Well, it's not even funny. There's real people who are genuinely affected, their mental health and wellness, their livelihoods, if they get laid off, due to bias or whatever. I'm sure Ashley has an amazing story about mental health and wellness and talking about culture. And it's just like, this is real, people. There's real people being really affected, their livelihoods, their own their own state of mental health and wellness, that how are they treating their families, like how are they being treated. It's just, this is very real, very urgent, very serious work. So there's nothing fluffy or trending about this work. It's not a nice to have. It is literally, think back of the digital transformation within companies. If you didn't do that, if you stopped at the BlackBerry, well, good luck with that. But if you went full through and you've stayed up to date on that, you're in a very strong position. Think of DEI the same way, my friends. The digital transformation permeated and changed everything, how the systems, how the business was done, how we related to customers, how we related to each other. Now we're working from home for many of us. That's what DEI is. It's no different. It's a business transformation. It is a change management. It is a transformation of the business that impacts every single part of the business.
There's an element of what you just talked about, Kim, and thank you for sharing all of that context that I think ties right back into some of the stuff that Ashley's done previously. And that's, I love how, Kim, you said that, DEI is not a nice to have. It's a business imperative. It's absolutely critical. And one of the things that is really interesting about Ashley's background, and I'd like you to share, is how you brought that to bear in your time at PNC, because you tied, all of the financial impact, the business impact, and the results of DEI initiatives to what it means to the bottom line. And I think that's an important distinction that people leaders need to put together. So tell us a little bit about how you did that and what other people leaders can do to do the same thing so that DEI isn't seen as a nice to have, it's seen as a critical business imperative.
Yeah. Well, I think having also seen both sides of the glass sailing myself, from my prior career to the last career, and then now in my current career, having seen kind of the different ways in which people were received based on their differences, I think is first. That's really kind of why I stem my research on empowerment of differences, because the differences that we have from age to race to gender to sexuality to language that we speak to educational background to social economic class status, I think that all of these things that make us different each have a different bearing or moment in relation to empowerment. It's also typically one of your employee resource groups, or what you want to do, or the cultural holiday that you want to celebrate. But if you really look at it from the fact that we all have these differences, we all have gender, we all have race, we all have ethnicity, we all have them as humans, right? All of the 8 billion different people on the planet. But we always either we're empowered or we're disempowered, right? Right? We may have privilege or we may have disprivilege in relation to each of them. And if you teach your leader to ask themselves that question in relation to each of their differences, now they're going to wonder and figure out, okay, well, what does this mean now that I am empowered? If I'm already empowered because of my gender, now what can I do with that? And that's kind of why my organization created an Empowering Differences assessment, to help people recognize that what they should do is they should take leadership actions. At the end of the day, if you're not actually putting these leadership actions into place, yes, that could be to create an employee resource group. It could be to create the history and heritage program. It could also be to track the millions of dollars of revenue that's created by showing up at an event that might be different than your normal target demographic. And then if you're hiring someone that's from that demographic community that can speak to that community, like I did when I showed up at PNC. And answering your actual question, I showed up at a transgender conference, and I looked around the room, and I put my PNC tablecloth on the table, and I had the sign, come and bank at PNC Bank, and I'll be your banker. Literally, I like printed a little piece of paper that said that. And people are walking through the vendor booth, and they're seeing hair and makeup and jewelry, and then they see me, and then they're like, what? And then they had to like do a double take. And then I'm sitting there with a piece of paper and a ledger, and I'm thinking, okay, how many conversations did I have? How many people did I meet? I was literally keeping track of every single thing that I would do. And then I turned it in. I said, oh, by the way, I think PNC should sponsor this transgender conference next year. Do you think that also you'll pay for my way to be there? Can you pay for the booth? Oh, can you also sponsor the event? And then they were like, well, yeah, of course, because you've given us the report of all the business that was mined there. Yes, we want to do that. We want to do that across all different types of events. And then that's why I went and then started moving outside of just trans events or LGBTQ events. And I started going to the Hispanic Bar Association Gala and Prospanica and the Black MBA Association. I would go to all these other events, and I would share my research on empowerment. I would talk about how we can all work together to drive empowerment of all of our differences. And then this is what real leaders do. Real leaders look at themselves, and they do a holistic assessment of where I have something that is already driving empowerment for me. And now I know that I should do that, and I should impact others through leadership actions. So that's where I come in.
I feel like I'm running one of my half marathons because my brain is like pinging all over the place with all this great insights that you both of you are sharing and bringing to the conversation. So if I'm summarizing what Ashley just said, one of the key things that I pull out from that story is that if organizations want to really take this beyond just a performative exercise, you need to look at, hey, we need to be from end to end, top down, bottom up, looking like the communities that we serve. That's how we tie it to a business outcome. So that was one of the things that came out from what you just mentioned. Kim, earlier you mentioned how DEI needs to be separate from HR. You need to have an internal and external subject matter expert that is separate from the C-suite that helps to navigate these initiatives forward. And those are just a couple of things that pop up from off the top of my head when I had these notes written down. I want to transition the conversation a little bit before we wind down the discussion. And I want to transition it this way. Throughout this conversation, we've talked about, hey, what the situation is, why are organizations failing in their empowerment efforts? How is that impacting organizations in their efforts to move these initiatives forward? So we've already covered all of that. Now, when we look at how do we move forward from here, and what are the takeaways that you can offer people leaders and talent leaders to help move the needle further on these issues of empowerment and DEIB, what are the top two things that you would suggest? I'm going to have Kim go with her first two, and then I'll move to Ashley, and we'll go from there.
We have to truly understand that all anybody wants is to be seen, heard, or valued. And if we're either making choices as communicators or as leaders or people in HR to create that space, foster that space, prohibit that space, be inclusive of that opportunity. And that's what we have to be more consciously aware of. That's why my part of the title is the conscious communicator. Janet's part of the title is the other part of the title. And so that tells you about our personalities right there. But that conscious awareness, really understanding all anyone wants is to be seen, heard, and valued, and staying curious in that rather than being triggered and being defensive. Regardless of where we are in the organization, staying in that place of curiosity and listening and believing people. So the more and more we empower, now we're not saying entitled employees. We're saying empowered employees, an empowered culture. I expect that as an employee coming in. When I worked at GoDaddy, when I worked at PayPal, I expect to be empowered. I expect autonomy. I'm a grown-up. I'm an adult. I'm going to make decisions. And you hired me to do this thing. Let me do this thing. Now, DEI is that lens that we put on the thing that we're doing. When I say that I want to do this thing, I need to learn the DEI skills that when I'm making decisions on how I'm doing this thing, who I'm working with, what's my process of doing the thing, has to have a DEI lens on it. So that's really that general application. And I need to have my company have my back. And I have questions about this, or I'm making mistakes around this. Can I get some support? Like, do you have my back in this? Because I want to learn about this and I want to apply it to my work. And as communicators, we have to create that vision, the benefit of the benefit, and we need to be specific about it, and we need to offer those opportunities. So there's no, I'll just reiterate that one point. There's no going back, my friends, only going forward. And so just creating that environment that makes it safe for people to make mistakes. That's part of the learning journey, and being held accountable for detoxifying our culture. But you've got to empower them, because that's what employees expect anyway when we show up. Now, that's what we have to give them, and that's what they deserve. And we're going to get the most out of them, and they're going to have the best experience when we finally figure out that formula.
So for those who are of the TikTok generation watching the streams either on YouTube or on LinkedIn, the TLDR version of what Kim just said is leaders have a responsibility to make it okay to say stuff out loud. That's how I understood it. It's probably pithy in my own head, but probably not great for the general audience. But I thought I'd throw that in there. Ashley, I want you to offer your two key takeaways when it comes to building that empowerment culture.
Yeah, so mine are simple. So the one is to do that holistic assessment of yourself, and to know exactly what empowerment means to you and what it means to the people along this journey, and how you're going to do that. And you can download the self-assessment right on my website, empoweringdifferences.com. I highly recommend that you do that. That's the one. And then the other thing is you have to answer the question of empowered versus disempowerment, privilege to disprivilege. You need to be able to answer that question for yourself in relation to the 10 differences. If you don't do that, you're going to miss the boat, and you're going to not necessarily know exactly which of your things that make you who you are, all of your differences, which one holds the most empowerment for other people, because that's where you want to focus on empowerment for others. And then if there is anything that you have that's going on in your world that you think that maybe you are disempowered or not empowered or anything in that safe space for you, even if you are a leader, you may feel that you have gaps in that space. And if that's the case, then that's where you need to drive self-empowerment that way too. Because remember, this world of empowerment works for everyone, even white, cishet, straight males. You all have the opportunity to garner more empowerment, but you could also be garnering empowerment for other people as well.
Great stuff, Ashley. And I want to keep it with you for one more second before we close down. And I'm going to keep it with you and then have Kim answer the same question. Where can people find you, and where can people find your books?
Yes. So you can buy my books, Empowering Differences, and the workbook, Empowering Differences, anywhere that you buy books at. But you can also get them right on my website at empoweringdifferences.com. And you can follow me on social media, Ashley T. Brundage, ASHLEY TBRUNDAGE. And I'm thrilled to connect with you and answer any questions that you have.
And just a special note here, Ashley is going to be the featured guest on the season 3 premiere of Cascading Leadership, which drops tomorrow. So she's going to be our opening act for another great season of our fun little podcast. So looking forward to that. Kim, same question to you. Where can people find you? Where can people find your book? And how can people get a hold of it?
All right, so I'm on LinkedIn. DEI Communications. Kim Clark is the URL. I have a website that is Communicate Like You Give a Damn. I really don't swear this much, but my website and my book would beg to differ. But I really, really, but it's called Communicate Like You Give a Damn. And so I offer 15-minute free strategic consultations for folks. Now, we've talked a lot about performative communications and performativity in general. A lot of people may not know what that is. So DM me on LinkedIn and just say performative what? Like performative what? Just say, hey, I have a graphic from the book that tells you the 4 signs. How do you know when you're getting into performative communications? And this helps in your marriage and your personal relationships as well as your professional ones. So you can do that. And then I'm on Instagram. I'm launching my TikTok this month. Wish me luck. But my Instagram is Conscious Communicators. So you can catch me there as well. I've deleted my Twitter account, but no surprise if you're in the DEI space.
I'm moderately active on Twitter, and this goes back to both Kim and Ashley. If Ashley, I know that you're everywhere. I'm not sure if you're on TikTok, but Kim, you just mentioned TikTok. Okay, so I'm going to invite you both to a private Slack community that I'm a part of called Social. And it has all sorts of great community tips on how you can actually improve your presence across all of those platforms. Now, it's probably not going to be that relevant for Ashley because she's got like 8 million followers everywhere. So whatever. But for us noobs, and I'm assuming, well, I'm the only noob here. I'm not sure if Kim is necessarily a noob. It might be good to be in that community. So I want to thank both of you for the great conversation and the great insights. I'm actually going to be lightly editing this session and then rebroadcasting it later in the week. So for those who missed this session, you can catch it again on replay or on demand. But awesome conversation. Really appreciate all the insights that you brought. There's probably like 50 takeaways in this session. So that's going to be great to take a listen to. For those who joined us on the stream and dropped your comments, thank you for attending and your comments and how you drove the conversation. That was awesome. We appreciate that. For those who want to get a hold of me, I'm not in as many places as Ashley, but I'm present. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on TikTok. You can find us anywhere that you see the Cascading Leadership handle or the Talent Strategy 60 handle. Obviously, you can find me at Circa as well. If you have any sort of talent strategy triumphs or challenges, make sure you drop me a message. Be happy to collaborate and see if there's a way that I can leverage my network to connect to you. So until then, we hope you enjoyed the conversation. We look forward to our next episode of Talent Strategy 60, where we are empowering leaders to do more with less by leveraging community intelligence. Thanks, and have a great rest of your week and day.